The lore of Heaven's Gate, the lore of Heaven's Gate is don't make a movie like that because it'll finish you off. The lore of Heaven's Gate is disaster.
Failure, the ship going down, Titanic, never let a director have his way.
Betrayal. There's so many things come to my mind with Heaven's Gate. You know, Iraq even comes to mind. It's, I think Heaven's Gate was used by powers that be to stop a way of filmmaking where the author was the director and was in control of the money.
I love the movie. I really love the movie. I can watch that movie and I can't really see any fault in the movie.
United Artists was a special studio because they trusted filmmakers. They didn't sit and watch dailies. We didn't sit and look over their shoulder. It was a sense of mutual respect between the artists involved and the studio. And if we went with the picture and said, okay, you've got a picture now, go for it, that was it. They went off and they made the movie.
We needed to make our own marks. Michael Cimino was a way of making our own mark. We believed.
We saw an advance print of Deer Hunter, I don't know how many weeks before it was to be released, and we were blown away.
We want to be making pictures with this man. This is a potentially great filmmaker, and we want to make pictures with him. So let's see what he would like to make. When we went into the picture, there were two givens. The two givens were Christopher Walken and Kris Kristofferson. And we said, okay, who's going to play the girl? Suddenly, we heard this name, Isabelle Huppert.
When Michael said he wanted Isabelle Huppert, the question that was asked him, I'm sure by Stephen and I know by me, was, how's her English? He said, oh, speaks it like we do.
I thought it made absolutely no sense to have a French actress playing the madam of a bordello in Wyoming in the 19th century. But Michael wanted this actress. We were told this was the only actress suddenly. Jane Fonda had said no. Diane Keaton had said no. Everybody else had said. So it was going to have to be Isabelle Huppert. Isabelle Huppert read for the role. I thought she was dead wrong. And we said to Michael, it's not going to work. She can't speak English that we can understand and that an audience is going to be able to understand. Yes, maybe she can work on it and so on. But the answer is no.
My phone rang a couple of days later. It was Cimino on the phone, and he said, I've been thinking about that, and it's still Isabelle Huppert. And I said, you know, this is a problem now because this is no longer about Isabelle Huppert. This is now about your word. You and I had an arrangement which now doesn't mean anything. He said, what's your point? I said, my point is this. I'll give you 48 hours to tell me you didn't mean this phone call, or I'm going to do my level best to make sure that we never make this movie. He told me to go f myself and hung up. And he says, so David, what is your problem with the movie? I said, my problem with the movie is I no longer know what his word means, Andy, and I don't know what the movie could cost. I don't know anything anymore because of what just happened. I said, David, what's your worst number? I said, Andy, you know, we're waiting for a budget. It could be 11.5, but after today, I don't know. I could pick a number. 20. Norbert, David says 20. What do you think? Norbert says, I can cover 20 out of foreign. And he says that Isabelle Huppert is not a problem for him. Everybody likes that in foreign. So Andy says, so David, I mean, look what we have here. I mean, Norbert says he can cover the entire worst case number you have out of foreign, and he likes Isabelle Huppert. So we don't have a problem, right? So I called Michael, and I told him that. And he was not surprised.
I personally believe she's wonderful in the picture. But the important factor, David is absolutely right, the important factor was the psychological power play that was being conducted there, and Michael won it.
He created something that we fondly called Camp Cimino. Have you heard about this? 7 o'clock, you go and you take riding lessons. And then at 9 o'clock, you have cockfighting lessons. Then you have your Yugoslavian, your Slavic dialect lesson.
I mean, we had a bus that picked us up in the morning, and the first thing we did is we would go shooting off rounds of blanks. We had blank gun lessons. Then, after that, we went riding. We had riding lessons. And then after that, we went and had roller skating lessons.
I had to dance. I must have waltzed across Texas. By the end of the thing, I had to take dance lessons every day, waltzing lessons. And roller skating, God, I almost killed myself on that roller skating scene.
I had the period roller skates for him, strapped them on. They had instructors, and they'd skate for a couple of hours a day for maybe a week or 2 weeks until they were ready and they could do it.
It was taxing, but I think that was a good example where like everybody sort of like just gave what they could because it just seemed exciting and wonderful looking, and it sort of, even when you were about to drop from heat exhaustion, you just would love to see how this thing is finally going to turn out.
And this is really true, since they really have this kind of thing where the cowboys would just come in and scrape the cow shit off their boots and lash these wheels on their feet and get drunk. Can you imagine what that must have been like? God. We all learned for that. We could skate backwards. We could waltz on skates. You know, we had a great time on that.
And we did that for like at least 6 weeks before I ever shot a single thing. It was really, literally, we called it Camp Cimino.
It was very unusual the way he worked. He would actually paint by selecting extras and put them into the right place in the set. Like, pretty much like a painter would paint them. He painted by picking up people and put them into the right place.
He would line up all the extras and go down the line, picking the right people for that particular scene. And it took time, you know, a couple of hours to select maybe 50 people. No, you don't stand there. You stand over there next to her, and you come over here.
Then once we started to shoot, you know, sometimes we would go for 3 takes, sometimes we would go for 10 takes. And many, many times you had to go for 40 takes.
I'm not used to seeing 57 takes. I'm really not. I'm not used to doing a minimum of 32 takes. He wanted it tried a bunch of different ways. It was like workshopping on film. You know, we did the happy version, we did the crying version, we did the furious version. I mean, each scene was taken to these degrees beyond which you weren't going for the ultimate take, you were going for a lot of choices.
I'm sure the reason for the multiple takes of different scenes was because of his attention to detail and his concern that he get it right, that it was going to last, that this was something for the ages.
I can honestly say we all thought we were making the next Gone with the Wind, because that's what Michael imbued in you, that you were making this wonderful, fabulous, important movie. And everybody gave their all.
We really believed in him. I mean, he was a wonderful, charismatic person. And if you were on the inside circle with Michael, there was nothing like it. You know, you just felt you were riding on air. And you could do anything.
And there is no strong producer to be there and say, Michael, it's already 10 o'clock. Move on. There was nobody there to do that for him. So he was his own boss, basically. You know, Joanne Corelli was a producer, but they were friends. So, you know, she could not say much about it. She just had to let him go.
One day we were shooting a scene with Kristofferson drunk in his hotel room, and the mayor and the group of town's gentlemen come in.
I had to wake up from a sound, drunken sleep and crack this bullwhip across the camera. And I did it every time. So I knew, at least it wasn't driving me crazy, that I was messing up every time, as some other ones did.
I did watch Chris kind of come back out and, you know, and crack the whip again, and I noticed he hit his face. You know, if you crack a whip wrong, it'll come right across your face. He got himself once, and yeah, it's a pretty. I think he got maybe got somebody else once. I mean, it really, wow.
From somebody on the outside, it would look like it was almost too much, but it never appeared that way to me. It was like, oh, this guy really cares.
I bet Michelangelo cared. I bet Picasso cared, you know. Anybody who has believes in his artistic vision, I bet they care. I probably didn't care that much, but I was glad to be working with somebody who did.
What we wanted was a picture. We never didn't want the picture, you see. If we had been able to sit back and say, oh, who the hell cares? We don't want the picture anyway. Let's just cut it off now, settle the lawsuits, and the money that we would have spent on Heaven's Gate, we'll spend on these 10 other pictures, which are nice pictures that we can't now afford to make because we're putting all the money in Montana. It was never that. We always wanted the picture, rightly or wrongly.
I had not been that close to a shooting movie in my life. This was my... I mean, well, a year before, I'd been on the third floor of 20th Century Fox as a glorified story editor for Alan Ladd Jr. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing.
None of us had been through an experience like this before.
Michael always said, you always tell the studio what they want to hear. And then you just do what you're going to do. And Michael gave us very specific scenes that we were to show them, nice, long vistas, you know. I mean, if you look at any individual scene in a long shot, it's amazing. I mean, the detail that went into everything. And it's all there on film.
The footage was ravishing. There was nothing that anybody on earth could say to criticize the footage. So we knew that it wasn't a case of a production that was falling apart. We never thought that it was a case of Michael was sitting in his trailer eating chocolates and watching television when he should have been out on the set. That was never the issue. The issue was we didn't agree that you could take this much time to achieve perfection. And if you continue to take this much time to achieve perfection, you're going to break our bank, and there's not going to be any company to release the picture.
I was the enemy, yes. I was the representative of those people on the other side of the fence, whom Michael should have considered to be supportive and not in any way an opponent.
Well, you know, it's unfair to judge artists at work. But I certainly thought maybe in those days that everything could have been going a little bit faster and still get the same result. But, you know, you cannot criticize somebody who wants to do the best film in his life and wants to make it right.
Vilmos told me at one point, I think Michael has fallen in love with this film. And if there was any excess, it might have been that.
There was one day, it was early morning, and we had started work at 4 in the morning with a dawn shot. And we shot in the morning, and the sun was there. And then the clouds came in, and we lost the light total. It was totally overcast. And Michael, we waited. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we sat, and we sat, and we sat.
Noon went by, and we didn't stop for lunch. And so went 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock.
Michael was waiting for this weather to clear, and it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we hadn't had lunch yet. So all the crew guys, everybody's on meal penalty, and it kept adding up and adding up and adding up. It was amazing.
Then finally, second idiot took the courage and walked up and said, Michael, what about lunch? And then Michael Cimino, you know, just like he was in a daze of creating, you know. He said, lunch? This is bigger than lunch.
Most directors are there to put their ideas onto film. They're not interested in how much does this cost or, you know, what we know. You have to break now for lunch. Why? I don't have to break now for lunch. I can see the sun coming over the hill. You know, there's that beautiful cloud. That will be there for all eternity if I get it on film. Nobody cares about the lunch hour 20 years from now, but they'll be able to see that visual that I've created forever. And that's what it's about. Yes, you're paying the bills, but Michael wasn't paying the bills.
We did believe that he had decided, I don't care what it costs. I don't care what happens to UA or at UA. I'm making my movie, and it's going to be the greatest movie I know how to make. And once we decided that was it, we then realized we were truly in trouble. because then you're saying, Michelangelo, put down your paintbrush. And he's saying, make me. And then the question was, fire him. Bring in somebody else to finish this movie in which we have by this time spent $15 or $20 million and don't have a movie to show for it.
How? There was nothing without Michael. Michael wrote it. He conceived the whole project. Every single minutiae on that film was Michael. Everybody would have walked, I'm sure. I mean, there'd have been a laughing stock. I mean, they were ultimately anyway, but they had a chance this way. There was no chance the other way.
We said Joanne is no longer producing the picture. United Artists is now producing the picture, and you, Michael Cimino, are our employee. And as our employee, we can tell you, these are the rules. You violate those rules, and you are in breach of contract. And when you are in breach of contract, you lose all of the things that you want. The most important issue was, if you violate enough of these provisions of the contract now that you are an employee of United Artists, not a partner, but an employee, you will lose Final Cut. And this was the issue that was paramount beyond any other issue for Michael.
It created an environment where people were waiting for not a masterpiece, something else. And that just kept rolling and feeding on itself.
Here we go. Stand by and roll, please.
Was that what it was? 3 hours each way? Oh, God, I can't remember. I blocked it out, but that was tough. Yeah.
You get up at 3:30 in the morning with a pillow, and you'd go and get in these vans, and you knew how to be there really quick so that you were one of the first ones in and would get the optimum spot to be in.
Everybody had their spot in the van, and everybody would show up in the hotel lobby with pillows and blankets. And you'd get in the van, and everybody would go to sleep for 2 hours.
And most of it was dirt roads. So it was like bam, 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 bam for hours.
It was a real force march. The lunches were, I didn't even eat. I would go straight in there and go to sleep in that little honey wagon there and sweat like a trooper, and go back to work.
I don't know how long we shot those battle scenes, but it was frightening, some of those things. Each time, I would just pray to God, I wasn't going to get hurt or anybody else was going to get hurt, and we would just go, yeah, charge, and just full blast. I mean, it was exhilarating, but even in a real battle, you don't, recock and keep doing it over and over.
You'd race madly around in this circle at a dead gallop as fast as you can, and firing and firing and firing. And we would do that for 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So you've got all this noise and chaos, they're firing back. You have wagons in the mix, dust so thick you can hardly see.
The extras especially, I think, were quite scared, because there are these 130-year-old, buckboards, whether they were real or replicas, careening around. And, it's not like driving a Hummer. It's scary. There were times when there was coming down, I suppose, from Michael through the ADs of we're going again, faster, louder, bigger, more.
When we got back, we had, it's quite funny actually, we had bars put up on the cutting room windows. And then we had all the locks changed so that nobody could come in. He said, we're not showing it to them, I'm not showing it to them until I'm ready. He wasn't afraid of anybody, and I mean, sometimes we'd be there and a call would come in from somebody and he would, he'd get on the phone and he'd scream and yell and swear at them and tell them this and that and the other and, they weren't going to mess with him and he'd slam down the phone and then he'd just turn to me and he'd smile, and we just keep going.
I have one regret in my life, in my working life, and that's that I left United Artists. I don't know what would have happened had I stayed. Maybe nothing would have changed. But I fault myself for walking away in the middle of that.
At the end of every day's shooting, a phone call went out from Oxford to tell me that the day's shooting had been completed on budget and on schedule. And Michael had been told, if I get a call that says we shot 5 minutes longer than we said we would, and we spent $500 more than we said we would, I will pull the plug and there will be no prologue, there will be no epilogue. And Michael believed it. Little late in the game. Little late in the game.
Well, Christmas because of the Oscars. Always the Oscars. That's the big drive with any film of any importance. You want to make that December release. And we worked, I mean, there weren't enough hours. We never stopped. I mean, there were days where we would go 3 days without sleeping. And so when you get to that point, you don't really know what you're doing anyway, because you're just so tired.
We got to the screening room and we saw Michael, spoke with Michael. I thought Michael looked exhausted, truly, truly depleted. I remember asking, how close are we to a final cut? And he said, it's a little long. I can lose maybe 15 minutes. And we sat down and we watched the movie. And the movie that we saw was 5 hours and 25 minutes long. The battle sequence alone was as long as most feature motion pictures. I was angry. I was angry. I was angry. The company had been put through turmoil. Other projects had gotten canceled or never made. Relationships within the company were deeply strained, some of them irreparably. The company was exposed in the industry at large in a way that few companies have been. And the internal hope that had kept us all going for those 2 or 3 years of this process now, which was that it was going to be a masterpiece and that would justify everything that we had gone through, was suddenly gone.
I can remember going to the first screening, the premiere in New York, and we were all very excited, and Mike was quite anxious because I don't know if he even saw the film before it was shown. I mean, it was wet right out of the soup. He had just put it together, and you just made, barely made the deadline to get it all together. And the movie comes on. I remember my first impression of seeing it was, this kind of the splendor of it was wonderful, but the rhythm of it was so unusual and so kind of slow and not what you expected to see, that the audience certainly was frustrated. Then you heard that terrible applause at the end. It was just, it was terrible. And then the next day we got up, and on the way to the airport, we were going up to Toronto for the next show, and picking up that review on the way to the airport and reading it.
Well, I read Vincent Canby's. I don't read reviews. That's the first thing. I read Vincent Canby's because it actually had the line in it, like being given a 4-hour tour of your own living room. And I just wanted to see how bad can a review be. And it was really scathing, angry review. I mean, basically, everything that people hated about the direction of film was piled onto Michael.
I think the critics were reviewing the production history. They were rewriting their reviews for The Deer Hunter, which they thought they had overpraised. They were getting back at what they perceived as a hostile treatment from the director. I think they were slapping United Artists for having allowed this to happen. But I never felt that there was a real serious attempt to see what is this picture trying to do, and does it succeed on its own terms? It didn't succeed on the terms they wanted to lay on the picture. And that was what they were writing about, was their terms for the picture, not the picture's terms.
It was, it was like, how can they not like our child? You know, I mean, that's how you feel. It's very personal. You know, and you don't want to believe that you have an ugly baby. Nobody does. You know, every baby's beautiful. And, you know, don't they see the qualities and don't they understand? You just think they're ignorant.
Michael was blown out of the water. I always felt like it was like you had a beloved child, you know, of yours murdered, and then the murder blamed on you. And it was unjust.
The notion of industry stories and business stories seeping into the national media had already begun in a certain way, and this was something that really kind of burst the floodgates.
It was a disaster. It was a disaster creatively because people misunderstood and thought that we United Artists had forced Michael to do the withdrawal and the cutting, which wasn't true at all. It was totally Michael's idea as far as I've ever heard.
I don't care where the idea came from. It was a horrible idea to pull the film. Because it was an admission that everybody thought Canby was right.
Michael always did what Michael wanted to do, and now he wanted to make it shorter. Because he wanted the film to see the light of day, and he wanted people to like the film. You know, he wanted it to be seen. So he was then determined that he was going to try and bring it down and make it more presentable. Although he may not personally agree with that, he was going to do his best to try and make it more presentable.
Ask how many starving orphans could have been fed forever. What is that? That doesn't have anything to do with the picture as a picture. And it was the perceived enormity of waste and arrogance with money that people were focusing on. I knew that I was going to be fired. It was in the air. There was just no way that I was going to survive. Who else are they going to fire to make a point? They were going to make a corporate point that something disastrous has happened and we have lanced the boil by firing Stephen Bach.
And so the uncreative people won. And that's what happened to the business.
You could argue almost that post-Michael Cimino, the time of the director was over. He single-handedly, whether fairly or unfairly, was the signpost that said, from now on, we're not going to let directors have that kind of power anymore.